Welcome to a new episode of the Creative Industry Insight podcast. I'm your host, Bobby. With 2024 being the 25th anniversary of the airing of The Sopranos, we are lucky enough to welcome a couple of guests from the show. Today, we welcome costume designer Juliet Polcsa. Juliet will talk us through how the different costumes and styles were created in the show. Please be warned, there are heavy spoilers in this episode. Now let's jump into the conversation with Juliet. Hi, Juliet. Thank you for joining me today.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're here to talk about The Sopranos, which has just celebrated its 25th anniversary of first airing on TV on HBO. 25 years, huh?
It's kind of
Amazing.
it just it's hard to fathom. It's hard to fathom, but yeah. And the fact that something that's 25 years old and still people still talk about. I mean, even today, I got a phone call from a reporter who wants to talk to me tomorrow about mob wives. I guess it's something on TikTok, and people are dressing like mob wives, and she wants to talk to me about it. And it's like, wow, who knew that that job would have such staying power?
I get as like creatives and people who work for the studio, there's never a way of sort of judging how popular something could be. Like, you can always watch the dailies and do a pilot and see that something's good, but you don't know how it'll hit with audiences. And
No.
considering 25 years on, I still see posts about who's been the best TV character, and Tony Soprano pops up. And then I mentioned off air as well, my friend had a Sopranos fancy dress for his 30th birthday, and yeah, you can't fathom how crazy it is that people still are talking about this show. And even if you go on Twitter or X, sorry, people are still saying like, yeah, Sopranos best show of all time. This is the one that sort of started it all off. And I don't know, yeah, it's just as I
Yeah.
said,
But at
25
the
years on.
time, 25 years ago, we weren't cognizant of any of that. We just kind of had this job, as a lot of things, kind of do start. And I remember after the first season aired, and then the cast, a bunch of people got nominated for Emmys. And everybody was just kind of like, this is new world. Some of them had never experienced anything like that before. And then they became old hat at it.
Yeah, and I guess once you start getting that award recognition and hype, people would then perk up to be like, wow, if this is done well in its first series, maybe I can, at the time as well, buy the DVD box set to watch it before the next series comes out. Because it's
Yeah.
event TV, we don't have it how it was now, where you can record it, or if it was on streaming, you can watch it whenever. That's another big thing that you kind of think as well, how much TV landscape has changed as well over the past 25 years. How
Oh, yeah. And it's
um,
probably, from what I read after these strikes are gonna may go back to that, But I remember, David Chase, it was really important to him that, the scripts were good and, he didn't want to put anything out that wasn't. And because he had done, episodic TV before, and he goes, at a certain point, he goes, if you get to an episode and it's about Meadow getting her driver's license, like you've just kind of lost it. And and I think it ended, when it needed to end. I mean, I think everybody would love for stories to go on and on and on, but you get to a point where you've told it and let it stand as at that.
I think well, you're right. Like, I don't think anybody would watch Meadow getting her driving license just because as a story point of view, it'd be like, oh, okay. But then I guess as audiences, you could relate to it as well because the line to the DMV doing the test, the nerves before the test, and all of that. But
But I guess, in the finale where, you're cutting to Meadow who's, driving to meet her family and she's parking the car. So like in a way that was like David getting Meadows learning how to drive in there
you know what?
somehow.
He always wanted to use that storyline, but I bet he got vetoed on so many times. It's like, now it's my turn. I'm going to put it
Mhm.
just in there so that you know, a little Easter egg for those people that said no, and didn't allow me. But and on top of that as well, in terms of like just story wise, like there's only so much you can always tell when it comes to these things. And you're right, it can always go. You could go on and on, but then you know how much then will people really be interested in watching it, or will then not be interested, or you want to go out on a high note. Plus, I
Yeah.
think it must have been one of the only shows in that time to be doing like 13 episodes for network
Well,
TV.
it was us and Sex and the City, was happening at the same time. In fact, we shot at the same studio and our offices were kind of near each other. Couldn't have two completely different shows and completely different fan bases, but that was how HBO kind of put itself on the map.
But it's perfect, isn't it? It's perfect counter programming that you would have a macho sort of show where you would get all the sort of you know, male audience in, and then you'd have something for the females as well with the Sex and the City and other audiences as well. I know I do a bit of a generalization in terms of saying who the audience is on the show, who'd be watching the show. So apologies on that front, but it's kind of like they have best of both worlds, really.
Sure, sure, sure.
But let's go back. I'm guessing it's probably best to go maybe 26 years in the past, maybe a little bit more because you would have to shoot the pilots. How did the project come about, and what was it that made you want to take it on?
Well, I actually wasn't involved in the pilot. Once they did the pilot and it had aired, I think they decided they wanted a different look, or for whatever their reason, they wanted another costume designer. And at the time, TV was kind of thought as the ugly stepchild. It wasn't kind of what it is now. The quality wasn't there, and I had been building my career in film, and it was the heyday of independent film, and the producer Eileen Landris had recommended me to go interview for this, and I really didn't want to, but Eileen had been, we've known her for years. She'd been very complimentary of my work, and I thought I owed it to her, so I would go. And I remember David Chase in my interview was looking at my resume, and he said, "Oh, I see a certain ascendancy in film. Why do you want to do TV?" And the fact of the matter is that I didn't. But I kind of backpedaled and I said, "Oh, well, don't you see TV as part of that ascendancy?" And he just said, "No." But I think ultimately David didn't want TV people. He wanted people who were film people, because that's the feeling, the look, the attitude, that he wanted. And I think when people talk about prestige TV, that's what it was, because at that point, TV, was sitcoms and laugh tracks, or I mean, certainly there were some good dramas out there, but not what it is now. And it's hard to describe to people who didn't kind of live through it, because you take it for granted now. It just wasn't there. Then I got the job, and so the pilot had aired, and so then I kind of picked up episode 2, and made some changes, and uh, kind of fully established that world.
I think as well with so just going with the initial meeting of going into something, it's funny how those things work out, right? When you kind of want to, you don't want to do something, but your friend's pushing you to do something, and somebody's sort of encouraging you. You think, I'll do it just for you, and then it sort of snowballed from there, really. Just because it's again, as I said, it's just one of those happy coincidences. And
Well, I mean, the
I
thing is, once I was in the show, because I had never done TV before, and it is, even though we were shooting it with like a film mentality and a film attitude, we still had TV budgets, and we had, TV schedules, and trying to cram that in. And I came from independent film with, smaller budgets, and I was completely understaffed. I was so stressed out all the time, and I really just loved the show, and I loved the characters, and I loved the cast. And I was really kind of killing myself to the point where I was almost having a nervous breakdown. But so about episode, I don't know, I think I did 9 or 10, I can't remember. Um, the show was up and running. Everybody had closets. Everybody's look was established. And I went to the same producer, Eileen, and I said, this is killing me. And I left. So they brought somebody in who did the last couple episodes. And then the show aired, and the show became this massive success. And I thought, I'm an idiot, like I left, but I didn't know. And much to my surprise, they asked me back. I guess all of the actors, felt very protected by me, and I helped kind of give birth to these characters, and they all asked for me back. So I went back and had a little bit more bargaining ability at that point, and got to get a bigger staff, so I wasn't going to be stressed out. And and there I stayed. It was a wonderful place to be.
I think that comes down to as well as like a testament to how you work and how you were with various cast members and helping them. Because I guess the way I always see it is that the actors there, they can prepare how they would like for how they're going to perform on the day in terms of how they're going to sort of react, how they look to towards the other characters and the way they might speak in certain tones. But then in the whole pre-production period, it's like this is where everybody else in the team comes in,
Mhm.
and for example, like yourselves, you're helping the cast build what they're wearing, what they're going to feel like they've lived in, what they feel comfortable with, and also in terms of what they like to wear in terms of clothes, or they could be allergic to certain things, so they might not be allowed to wear that. So you might have to
Mhm.
change your design at that point as well. So I guess it comes down as well that you build a trust with them and communicate with them how, what they feel comfortable with and
Yeah,
what
oh,
looks good for the screen
absolutely.
as
I mean,
well.
that's one of the crucial jobs of a costume designer. You really have to listen to your cast and collaborate with them. And there's nothing that I want to force an actor in. If they're not going to feel comfortable, then that's going to affect performance. And I want to do everything to support them and not detract from anything. And I think, they all really, appreciated that. They knew I looked out for them. And as the seasons went on, I mean, that was one of the interesting things to me about this being my first TV job, is that I'm used to doing a movie where you have a beginning and an end, and that's it. You tell the story. Well, this was multiple stories over and over and over again, and you had a chance to track these characters through different seasons and different decades and different ages, and different life changes, and all of those things that a character would normally change, but then what is still true to that character. You don't want to kind of go off on in left field. And I think all the actors really kind of appreciated that. And as some of them got famous, and their personal taste would change, and they wanted some of that to kind of seep into their character, and I had to be a little bit more the keeper of the character to say, no, Dr. Melfi can't wear leather pants.
But when it comes to something like that, because as you said, mentioning people's tastes change, and the example that you gave about Dr. Malfi wearing leather pants or trousers for people in the UK, I don't want to think that we're saying something completely
Right.
context. How does that affect then your designing and the conversations that you would have with David for each character? Because people's tastes are changing, they kind of want to reflect that in their character as well.
Oh,
Um,
and it comes down to a conversation. I'm certainly kind of open to suggestions, and then we'd have to kind of talk about it. We're like, was that suggestion right or wrong for the character? And if it was right, then great, let's incorporate it. And if it was wrong, we could talk it out, and we could kind of see why that didn't work, and what that new element, what would that say? And if it wasn't saying the right thing, then we can't include it. Um, yeah, and I think David was very happy knowing that, his characters were, taken care of.
yeah, and I guess you also have to show that there's things that are changing with characters and how their tastes change. I think if you have the main guys in the crew, I think the older people, I don't think their taste would change. They'll go for whatever's comfortable for them. So when we're talking we were talking about the Villar tracksuits and how certain characters would be wearing them with the vests and the chains and certain brands as well, or it makes that they would wear because they would want it to feel not just authentic for the screen, but also authentic to what the character would wear and how
Mhm.
loyalty plays like a big part in the whole culture. So there would always also probably be loyal to sort of brands and comforts that they have in their encounter and have in their lives as well.
No, and it's also interesting that, a lot of mob guys, don't come from wealth or culture. They certainly have they accrue wealth through their, misdeeds and what they do. But their taste level, comes from a different, upbringing or attitude, and they're not sophisticated, or do they know, kind of brand names and, what is good tailoring. And so sometimes they're drawn to, things that they like, but they're not necessarily classy. And I think some of that comes from, a lot of these mob guys are just, if in the absence of the mob, they just would have been working class guys. And so then you get this elevation, and it's, just kind of wrong in a way.
Yeah, I think it's like as the old like sort of saying goes, it's like money doesn't always buy you class. So you kind of sometimes you're sort of mix matching of what you're wearing, should we say? I think there's like it's like sometimes it's the same with if people who don't have really like a stylist, if they're sort of coming up as an example, like celebrities coming up, and sometimes you just go for a name brand because it's a name brand, but then you could be wearing I don't know, ripped jeans with shoes that just don't go with it, and then you can kind of tell that it just doesn't, it's not the right look.
Yeah. And it's also, we were very lucky back then that, there's so much more. I mean, the internet has exposed people to so many things, and people who maybe 25 years ago weren't on the cutting edge of what fashion trends were, or be able to kind of order things from kind of anywhere in the world. So there wasn't that aspirational, kind of dressing. It certainly wasn't, what they talk about Succession, the quiet luxury or something like that. There was nothing quiet about them. And the luxury were their cars, and the money in the cash in their wallets, the jewelry that they gave their wives and gumars.
Yeah, and also the sort of houses that they have and the food that they'd go eat. Like that would always be that's like their sign of sort of wealth, being seen in these places, and also the houses. But I guess that also comes from, if you're coming up from a poor background, and amassing all this wealth, you basically start providing for people and give them what you didn't have whilst growing up.
Right, exactly. I mean, you look at, Livia's house compared to Tony's house, and what a difference. And that's he's showing off his wealth and power, and that I've kind of made it. It's a little bit of a, but then there were, characters like Polly Walnuts, who still, kind of lived. We didn't really see a lot of his house. I think we saw his apartment once, but it was a lot more kind of, simple.
Yes, it was sort of like had that modest feel to it, and he had what he needed, and that was it. He didn't need the sort of. I guess it probably comes down to as well if his character being single, and not really having a family, then you just need what you need, and that's it. You don't want to go overindulge because then there's
Yeah,
also it probably creates a feeling of if you're in a big place by yourself, the feeling of loneliness and whatnot. But I think what's quite striking as well when you're talking about when they're sort of all dressed up as well, it's in the first series when Christopher and his friend hijack the truck. and they
Mm-hmm.
steal their suits from that Uncle Junior has
Mm-hmm.
those trucks. And when you see the suits in the show, because they're not necessarily one like now you'd have suits that are quite slim fits, and I would say like the sleeves are a little bit shorter and you can see that they're quite more tight and well fitted, but in the show they're kind of more they sit a little bit baggier and they kind of have a different feel to it. They don't necessarily look like the standard sort of cotton polyester sort of suits. They look more. I might need some help on materials because I'm not that great with when it comes to it. But you can tell they're like a more higher end looking for the suits. When it came
Yeah, and
to
it just, you know, fashion has changed. I mean, the way men wear suits now has changed dramatically. I mean, if you can get a man to wear a suit, because you know it's becoming a, you know, historic item now. You know, but that was you know, like you go into the dance, you know, you're all kind of dressed up and you're looking good. That's the best you can possibly look. And so all the little flourishes that went with that. There were so many details involved in everybody's costumes, whether you saw them or not. But you know, between the color of the suit, the fit of the suit, the color of the shirt, the style of the collar, the, you know, the tie and the pocket square, and you know, any kind of jewelry, is it a tie clip or a cufflinks or a tie chain, or just so many little things kind of went into it that just made it. I love those scenes when like all the guys were having they'd have dinner at Vesuvio or something. And the reality is when people go to restaurants, and I'm sure it's the same in England, people don't dress up anymore. And that was my little thing where I wanted them to dress up at the restaurant. Um, and everybody kind of liked it, and we just kind of like kept it that way. So there was always, you know, you'd have these big scenes with all these guys, and you know, how do you make a scene with a bunch of guys in suits and, you know, still have their characters and everybody kind of looks, you know, their certain way, and make sure colors don't clash and that type of thing. But Jim, Tony Soprano, he, of all of the guys, I mean, he dressed the classiest, mostly because he kind of went, he was in a lot of worlds, you know, he was like with his family and his kids' school, and you know, he would deal with, you know, people on the outside, and we wanted him to be an everyman, so you didn't want to really kind of make his character so specific. It had to have a kind of vagueness about it. And because he was the boss, when they were dressed up, nobody really looked the way Jim looked when he was dressed up, because Jim never wore ties that were, you know, heavily patterned and, you know, and gaudy with matching pocket squares. He had a certain kind of classic menswear about him that just kind of showed he was the leader of the pack.
because he has that casual look where I wouldn't say wears like they're not Hawaiian shirts, but they're sort of more loose fitted shirts when it's like that casual wear. But when
Yeah.
he's sort of dressed up, you're right that he has that extra little bit of class in terms of the pocket squares and the way that he's dressed and the color schemes that go with it. Because he's not necessarily when you look at somebody like Silvio, for example,
Yeah.
he has more of a garish look than Tony in terms of like I was even looking at the photo now. There's one where he's wearing a grayish suit with a red shirt, which it takes a certain type of person to pull that off.
Stevie can kind of pull off anything. You know, when we were talking about, you know, Silvio Dante, and I mean, so much of the work was done by the wig. I mean, that just like is so much of the character right then and there. But because he owned a strip club, and, you know, Stevie is a musician, kind of felt like, you know, he was an entertainment. So it felt like that was an excuse for him to be a little bit more kind of bolder and colorful. And we kept looking to the brilliant work of Rita Rayak and John Dunn on Casino, um, and the way they dressed Robert De Niro in very kind of colorful, um, and we were kind of very influenced by that, and you know, taking it down quite a few notches for our New Jersey strip club owner. But Yeah. In fact, you know, then we would have, you know, scenes where not all the guys can wear suits all the time. And you know, some of the more odder shirts that I would find, you know, kind of worked for Silvio. And there was one time that Stevie said to me, he's like, "Oh, I have a shirt at home that you know, I think would be really good for Silvio." And I said, "Well, bring it in. Let's take a look at it." And he brought it out, and it was a very kind of faux Versace-esque, you know, type of print. And before I even said a word, some of the other guys said, "Oh no, that's not a Silvio shirt. That's a Furio shirt." And I was like, I've done my job. You know, they all kind of can tell each other characters' clothing. And they were right. They were right. It wasn't right for him, but it was right for Furio.
Is that the one? 'Cause I've got a photo up. Furio was literally about the next person I wanted to ask about. Is that the one where it has like the white sort of front and then sort of black collar?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly the one that I had up. That was like that's what I wanted to ask next. Because with Furio, because he'd be again coming from the European background as a character and having that sort of different lifestyle, you can imagine that he'd be a lot more. He would have that more of a European feel and a lot more. You would notice if he was wearing certain brands,
Yeah.
and especially if it was like a nod to the old country as well. Like it would only be Italian brands, not you wouldn't. I don't think you'd ever see him wearing something like Nike or Adidas or anything like that.
No, no, not at all. And it also, it's like, you know, he's coming to this country and there's, you know, already a group of guys and they dress a certain way. And I just couldn't have him dress like everybody else. There had to be something kind of different about him. So when we kind of, you know, hit upon those shirts, it was just, you know, that's it. You
I
know, it
think
still kind of worked within that world, but it kind of said a little bit about him and where he came from. And, you know, the fact that like, you know, he and Carmela had this little thing. It just, almost little kind of, you know, with his ponytail, little kind of romance novelty.
yeah, he's that sort of dreamy. It's always like the sort of like a you got the Queen and then it's like Aladdin and Jasmine sort of thing. He's a
Hmm.
guy who gets his hands dirty by doing all the sort of dirty work, but also
Hmm.
being quite manly with the way that his you see when he has his own house and how he gets involved there, and then yeah, Carmela's the Queen.
Hmm.
But there's but even looking at his outfits is the same with like the when he has like the leather jackets with just a normal shirt as well. I think that's something that's quite big on him as well. Is that
Hmm.
there's even though he has a casual look, it's still on more of the smart side rather than casual.
Yeah. You know, and then a little bit, he could pull off sexier stuff that better than some of the other guys could. So, you know, we would kind of fall to that sometimes too. You know, tighter shirts and showing his biceps.
And then there's also somebody I would love to talk about is Ralphie because he has that he has like the cravats
Hmm.
and he has that a different sort of style of when he's smart and dressed in a suit
Hmm.
compared to somebody like Tony. I think he's a little bit more he's kind of going for that sort of more West Coast Hollywood feel to it
Hmm.
rather than how an East Coast would wear clothes.
Yeah. I mean,
And he
he definitely was not looking like a guy from the neighborhood, you know, who was kind of dressing up. He had a look, and I think it was important to us that everything about Ralphie just annoyed the shit out of Tony. You know, you had to make him like a thorn in his side. And when we kind of, you know, came on the very kind of Ralph Lauren, you know, type of way to dress and a little bit more of a, you know, an air about him, like who the fuck do you think you are? Excuse my language. But you know, who do you think you are? It had to get under Tony's skin, and that stuff did, you know, it really did. So we kind of went with it. And it also didn't hurt that Joey Pants, who played Ralph, could kind of rock that style really well. So it kind of worked.
I think as well, like the actor as well, just everything about him, the way that he behaved and the clothes that he wore, like it. Even as an audience member, he annoyed the shit out of me as well. But you kind of liked him in a weird way because it was that was just how he was, and compared to how Tony would be with his pocket squares and suits, he would have that sort of still going for that classic old school feel.
Well, it
Like,
was important, when we unfortunately lost Nancy Marchand in our second season, the dynamic of the show with Tony and his mother, which was a huge, huge part of, why David, kind of wrote this. Um, our antagonist was gone. And, you know, trying to find, what could be the other antagonist in Tony's life. And Ralphie kind of, fit the bill.
and it's when it comes, I'd get on to Tony's mum in a moment, but even that sort of dynamic of like the mother and son, because your mother's always been putting you down and making you feel that way. There's always going to be like a chip on your shoulder to be like, you know what, I'll prove you wrong. I'll get something better. I'll do something better. I'll get the next best thing. I'll get the next best clothes. And it doesn't necessarily always work out that way as well. In those instances, because you're not really dealing with the problem
Yeah.
at
You
hand.
can't you can't buy self-worth. And if that's what your parent did was taking away your self-esteem as a child, somehow spending money gives you that kind of thrill, but it doesn't ever solve the problem because you still just, and hence why he went into therapy.
Yeah, exactly. And what I'm curious to know about as well is when you have the older characters in the show. So you mentioned Tony's mum. You've got Uncle Junior. You've got Carmine Senior. When it comes to those characters, because they come from a slightly different generation. There'll be a different sort of backstory to the way that they carry themselves. How do you go about designing for characters like that, and what are the discussions with the actors as well on what they want to portray?
Um, well, for Livia, for example, there's I'm not Italian myself, but so many of my friends are, and a couple of them would always say that, their mother would never wear pants. There was just something kind of classic, almost kind of like old school about this Italian woman, and but there was a certain kind of dowdiness to her, and her colors were, kind of grayed out. There was nothing kind of bright or accessorized. I mean, just her attitude and the way she looked just needed to be, uh, you know, like even she has like one of those aprons that, it's like a gilet type of kind of apron. And we grayed it down so it just had this like old aged, just kind of sad feeling to it. There was nothing happy about, her character at all. And then, once we kind of hit upon that, it was, you have your parameters that you kind of go through. With Uncle Junior, the glasses were, again, did three-quarters of the work. And, some of the stores that I would shop at before where actual mob guys, would shop, and the owner of the store was really kind of very helpful. And the type of shirts that Uncle Junior would wear, the banded bottom, kind of polo shirts, that that is something an older guy would wear. A younger guy wouldn't, kind of go that way. He had not too showy, a little bit quieter, and you know, maybe how things might have been, and the younger generation, got a lot more showier. Dominic Chianese, who played Uncle Junior, I mean, you couldn't meet a more wonderful, sweeter person. But he had these shoes that he wore basically for the entire season. They were like his go-to dress casual shoe. at the very end of the season, I mean, the end of the run of the show, he said to me how those shoes were never comfortable. And I'm like, oh my God, like, what do you mean? Like, why didn't you tell me? We would have bent over backwards, to get you. And it's the last thing I want to do. And he said he just kind of used it for his character, that he was just uncomfortable all the time. And even the glasses for the prep department, once he put them on, he could barely see. So some of those things he kind of used to just make Junior just this miserable guy. I didn't do it intentionally, but he kind of was like, oh, I'm going to use this. I mean, you can imagine, purposely wearing shoes that hurt you all day long. And if you look at them, you're like, oh my God, those shoes must be incredibly comfortable. And they weren't. Poor Dominic.
But sometimes I've always think of like the Peter Cushing story of when he was on the set of Star Wars, and when he knew that they would only do a mid shot and not show below his waist, he'd always wear slippers on set to be
Hmm.
comfortable. And listening to that is like the complete total opposite. It was very uncomfortable for me, but I can't believe he never said anything. Even though I'm sure he said that, that helped him get into his character. But, to do so many episodes and so many seasons and then be in those shoes and just be like, day after day, be in those really
Yeah.
uncomfortable shoes. I wonder if he ever complained to his wife or partner to say, I
Oh,
can't believe I have to wear these shoes again. And then,
oh, he
start
didn't
to be
want to bother
serious.
me. He said that too. I didn't want to bother you. So sweet.
I think that's really like I know that's like really what is it? Him being conscientious, but it's like, oh, all those years of suffering on your poor feet though, man. Come on, you could have said
But you
something.
know what the thing is? It also is something that an older actor would do, because I think years ago you just kind of wore what the wardrobe department told you to wear. There wasn't a lot of, and sometimes you would have uncomfortable stuff, and it was just part of your job, and you just, and now not so much. People speak up, people want to be collaborative, and I think that was just something that an older actor would do, where a younger would be like, I'm not wearing these. These are uncomfortable. I'm not wearing these. You'd have to solve the problem, or for whatever the reason.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess so. I think as well, also actors' methods of getting into character are all different, right? And especially when you're playing someone, I guess the best way to say Junior is quite miserable.
Yeah.
And that's the best way for you to get into that mindset to be like, well, I'm going to be in these shoes all day, then I'm going to feel like this and this way. It's the same with like I read earlier, James Gandolfini put a stone in his shoe to get into character, so he always had that sort of slight discomfort.
I haven't, it's funny. I read that too, and I didn't. If he did that, I didn't know it. It is There is a famous story about the costume designer of Midnight Cowboy, Anne Roth, kind of gave Dustin Hoffman his helped with his character. What happened in fittings, that she suggested that he does put a rock in his shoe, and so that's something that Dustin Hoffman did. So sometimes I wonder, like, maybe Jim did put a rock in his shoe. I was never cognizant of it. I know that there were things that I would give Jim that he hated. Like, he felt uncomfortable in them. Like, and he would tell me. So I knew that he didn't like loafers. I knew that he didn't like flat front pants. We had these custom made shirts, and they just felt they would tighten. He just felt constrained, and he hated all those clothes. So we tried them, and it didn't work, and that was it. And there was a scene once that he had to be really angry. Like, he was in bed, he got a call from Gloria, and then he went over to Glow Boat Motors, and then he basically, has her, by the neck, up against the wall. So he just had to have this unbridled anger. And from a costume standpoint, it didn't have to match anything. It wasn't what he was going to wear the next day, or, he just got out of bed. So I could really put him in whatever I wanted. And so I decided to make the costume all of the things that I knew made Jim angry. And so when I went into his camper to explain what I had done, I mean, he was very touched to see that I was helping him in his scene. And it did. All those things helped pissed him off.
I guess as well, just getting into that role and getting into that mindset, and then being having this, as you said, the shirts or loafers as well that you wouldn't like, probably aids that as well. Knowing that actually, one, you've been considerate anyway with it, but then also just like maybe we should just go all out and release that sort of uncomfortableness on screen for yourself. But I think there's also another story where I think the story is that about James Gandolfini wearing shorts on one of on the I think it's on the pilot,
Yeah.
and I think apparently he was approached afterwards to say that actually wait no, it was he was in the pilot, sorry, he was told never to wear shorts again. I'm not sure
No,
if
exactly.
how true that is with a wise guy telling him.
Well,
um
that where it came from was me,
oh, okay.
because I mean, I think what he wore on the pilot, but we also had a kind of like a cookout scene in the backyard, and the first season when I was there. And I thought, what's more, American dad backyard barbecue, standing there wearing shorts. And so that's what I kind of put him in. And it wasn't until after it aired that I went back to my store, where my technical advisor, the guy who ran it, who knows wise guys inside and out and what they wear, and he's the one who said to me, he pulled me aside, he goes, "Jules, boss, you don't wear shorts." And so I just thought it was so funny. And I, in turn, then, kind of told that to the writers and told David Chase. And somehow the story took on a life of its own. But it basically came from me getting a critique from my my store owner, tech advisor. And so I never put him in shorts after that. Boss doesn't wear shorts.
Ah, so somebody has to edit that on IMDb to say to change that story. But
Right.
again, uh, c- so that comes up. That's where I found out. I read about that story was on
Oh, okay.
DB. I think it's like one of the fourth one down about like when they say like trivia about the show.
Oh,
Um,
I see.
so somebody needs to edit that to show that actually that's not
Well, I
the
guess
case.
sometimes nobody really cares about the truth.
Yeah, that's true. It's like you don't want the truth getting in the way of a good story, but
Yeah.
still,
But I will take credit for, that did come from me. And it's like a game of telephone, you tell the story so many times and people just kind of assume that, that's what it was.
yeah, that's true. But with there's going from that as well to talking about the ladies in the show, because there's ladies in the show that are of different sort of age, different stages of their life as well. You have Carmela, who I think she has again, she has like the same sort of feel as Tony in the way they dress her. She has that casualness about her. But then she also always has that sort of elegance and class when she dresses. And it's the same with like the color palettes and the patina used on her. And then also you would have Adriana, who has that more sort of modern, younger, vibrant and energetic feel to how she dresses.
Mhm.
When you started with those characters and going through the different mob wives, where did you begin with that, and how did you go about deciding what people would wear as the series progressed?
Well, Carmela, so often, we would see her in the house, and making breakfast, or, or kind of cooking, or she didn't really have a career. She wasn't a career woman. And, she certainly, had money. And it was like a pre-yoga mom type of thing. But we very often had her in active wear. The conceit was she, worked out in the gym in their basement, or, she did something before everybody else was up or whatever. And we would have that a lot in her house. Carmela was very coordinated and very outfitty, and compared to her with the other woman, she had to again stand out a little bit, that she was I don't want to use the word the queen, but she was the main chick. One of the biggest changes that we made about her from the pilot, and it didn't even really have to do with costumes, but I just thought that she needed to have nails. just kind of French manicure and jewelry. And, what we kind of ended up with her jewelry, it was, she would wear the same pieces, all the time. It was like her everyday jewelry. And, for special events, maybe there would be kind of something different. But those two changes were kind of important in how Carmela dressed. And you couldn't find an actor who is more divergent from their character than Edie Falco. I have to say it was probably, I think, between Edie and Stevie Van Zandt, watching them arrive to work, of how they wear their own kind of casual, just out of bed, have to go into hair and makeup early clothes, to coming out of their trailer, hair, makeup, wardrobe, everything. And the transformation was just always so satisfying. And some of the other mob wives, well, not Adriana wasn't really kind of a wife, but Adriana's character morphed a little bit. In the beginning, she wasn't really that important. She was just like a hostess. And then gradually she became, something more. So again, Dre DeMatteo could just pull off anything. It didn't even matter what size it was. I could just give her anything and she'd just like wear it. And there was definitely a sexiness to it, but it was she worked at a club, so there was a little kind of, and Dre has a certain, rock and roll edge to her. So we wanted to get a little bit of that in there. But yeah, she was a lot more assured in how she dressed than how probably the character, really was. She was just a little bit of a pushover. Um, and the other mob wives, oh God, it's hard to remember. There was in the same way that I kind of found this store in Brooklyn where it became my kind of go-to for shopping for my mob guys, there were these stores in malls in New Jersey that they don't exist anymore, but there was a store called Cachet that had a very specific customer, and not necessarily that it was a mob wife, but it had a little bit more kind of nouvelle riche, but not quite tasteful. And I remember I walked into that store and it was like bells went off in my head. I'm like, this is it, sometimes some of the stuff wasn't right for the character, but by and large, we made it work.
Because, like as you said, you'd have to have some distinction between each character and also the sort of hierarchy that is there.
Mhm.
Which is there because you want to show people of the different sort of statures as well. Um, did you feel like as well, like as time had progressed, that as the characters changed and certain situations changed, so do you feel like you might need to tweak how they were dressed? So, for example, like in season 4 with Carmela, where she's kind of drifted away from Tony and going on another date, that she would change her style more than rather be sort of reliant on money from Tony to sort of and being spoiled by him in
I
that
think
way as
I
well.
think I think the changes were kind of more as time changed from 1999 to 2007, and fashions would change a little bit, and what was available in stores, and the character would kind of evolve with that. But I always kind of tell people that once you really know who a character is, like, it's like shopping for a member of your own family. If you were in a shop going through a rack of clothes and you pick something out, and would you would you buy that for your brother? Would you buy that for your father? And you would know if it works or not because you know that person. It's the same thing for a character. Once you kind of know who the character is, and you just kind of realize like that would work, that wouldn't work. So every year we shopped a lot in stores. I mean, we did make some stuff, a lot of it more custom suits for the guys, but seeing what was available as fashion changed a little bit and how that character would. And as far as changing for circumstances, I think she still she is who she was. I mean, when she started kind of building spec houses, I mean, maybe she had a little bit more, it's like her first job, you know? Um, she had a little bit more kind of, seriousness about her, but all of those things were plot driven and script driven.
Yes, and I guess with things like that changing for characters and what they're going for, you do want to portray what they're wearing as something different and show the sort of maturity and how they're growing as a character as well. I think you might have answered one of my questions that I had in mind. What it was about because the show had been on for it spans a number of years, and also you could say decade because it crosses over between
Yeah.
decade, century, and millennium. So much does change in fashion, and when it came to sort of purchasing clothes and things for characters to wear and having things change over time, how do you adapt to those fashion changes, but then also don't lean too much to stray away from what the essence of the character is in their costume?
Well, I mean, it's kind of like what I said before. I mean, what kind of leads you is how well you know who that person is, and that answers some questions, when you're kind of finding things. And this is a new style, but um, is it is it for a character who's sexy? Is it sexy enough for them? Is it comfortable enough? Is it the right color? Like all of the things that kind of your guidelines for your character. If it kind of ticks off those boxes, then um, you consider it. And nothing really happens until you try it on at a fitting. And you kind of look in the mirror and the character's either there or it's not. So that kind I think the person who or the two people I think who had the biggest arc on the shows were Meadow and AJ, because they grew up. I mean, what they started as and where they kind of ended up. I mean, Meadow was just, tween, and she, ended up into this very self-assured young woman. And, AJ was just kind of this pudgy little mouthy kid. And kind of they kind of grew up. So things definitely changed with them. And, for AJ, as his character was changing and whatever new age that he was, I kind of looked to Robert Eiler as far as, because he was that same age of suggestions of what a kid that age. And, he was very into that, kind of metal rock and bands called Slipknot. And, and we kind of incorporated some of that because it just seemed true, and gradually as he got older, he kind of grew out of some of that stuff. And Meadows' look went from very, early aughts tween to a sophisticated college girl who was much more liberal minded and socially conscious. So it was kind of fun to see their arc. But it all kind of seemed organic, because you're not conscious of it as it's happening. It's little by little. If you look at the beginning and you look at the end, you kind of see it, but in the middle you're just doing what seems right, and kind of end up there. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Personally, I think it does because it's like with each character is going to be different, and I think as you said as well, it's like the ones that would be affected the most would be Meadow and AJ, and the and sort of people their age in the show, like Jackie Jr. for example. It's the as you're growing up and trying to find as a sort of going from like a teen to an adult, finding your identity, finding things that you like and how you're going to dress. So it's like I think in one of the series, AJ has a Marilyn Manson shirt. So there's those phases as well where you grow into listening to certain music and you want to be into bands and skateboarding and that sort of
yeah, and you
outfit.
gradually grow out of that, and I think some of the older characters, like I think of, Tony Sirico as Polly Walnuts, he he arrived at his look, and that was it. Wasn't going to change. It's like I think he kind of dressed at whatever he thought his heyday was, and that became his look, and we never really kind of veered from it.
Yes, and let's not forget the with his tracksuits having the suspenders as well.
Mhm.
Um, you can't go miss for that. You can just
But a
say,
lot of that was Tony Sirico because that's how he would dress. That's how he would wear them. It was funny. He's a very, very particular man. Very particular man. And there were, and I've said this before, and people have kind of asked me, there were like short sleeve sweaters, these kind of knit t-shirts that had called a mock turtleneck. And he would look at it and say, I can't wear this. I can't fit this over my head because it was all about ruining his hair. And I had to like talk him off a ledge and kind of figure out a way to help him pull the neck out so we could get it, get it over his head without ruining his hair. But yeah, how he looked in real life was not very dissimilar to how he dressed on the show. Those white shoes that he wore, that's him through and through.
you, so sort of just staying on that subject for Paulie, is that apparently he used to wake up extra early to do his hair for the wingtips. And somebody was, I think this was on the Talking Sopranos podcast, that each season you notice that his wingtips get sort of more and more grey around his hair, which I
Mhm.
think is such a clever thing to sort of incorporate into his character. But when you have somebody who sort of brings certain things about themselves into their character, does that make it harder for you as a designer, or does that sort of take the pressure off a little bit, knowing that you're collaborating with an actor who knows what they want and knows what's going to be right for them as well?
Yeah, I mean, I always kind of enjoy when actors bring something to the table and have distinct ideas, and as long as we can discuss it and it works for what the story is, then all for it. And it's win-win because then they feel comfortable. They don't have to kind of think about you. You're not forcing them into something that they feel isn't right. So yeah, it's great when actors kind of bring that to the table. I have to say I would rather that than when an actor will come into my fitting room and we'll talk about the character and their response is, well, whatever you want, you know better than me. And I'm like, no, no, that's not the response. I don't know better than you. It's a collaborative thing. So I enjoy it when they bring something to the table. Uh, so yeah, I like it.
Okay. Yeah, I would just always think that there's certain things that I can like again, I guess as a costume designer, you need to be open 'cause you need to collaborate. But hearing what people like to bring in and what they think is right, it's always kind of like I guess it's an interesting sort of insight in how people work and
Well,
the
but it's different when you're doing a show that's a little bit more a fantasy, or if you're doing Game of Thrones or Wednesday. I mean, it's a different design process or a kind of attitude about what somebody, because you're painting a much bigger picture. When you're doing something that's much more reality based, they cast an actor who incorporates a lot of that character in their own, that's they cast him for a reason. Then you'd be foolish not to, kind of incorporate that, because if if your goal is realism, then that's what it is. It's different. I think I would feel differently if I was I don't know why I'm thinking of the show Wednesday, but those it has that very specific design look to it. And an actor really can't come in and say, "Oh, well, I think I would wear blah blah blah." That's a that's a different that's a different kettle of fish. But for, you know, capturing something that feels real, I always want my actors to feel comfortable, and again, we talk about it if it seems right for the character. I mean, there's this story where a famous costume designer would respond when an actress said, "Well, I don't like yellow." She goes, "Well, does your character like yellow? Not about you, it's about your character." So If it frames it within what's right for the character, then wherever it comes from, as long as it's right, it's right.
Yeah, or touche as an answer as well to say that, because yeah, it's you don't want the two to sort of bleed into one with character and actor. In terms of as well, because like you've got the showrunner David, but you're also working with a number of directors on the show as well. I think Tim Van Patten directed the most with 20 out of 60, 20 out of the 86 episodes on the show.
Wow.
How do you go about working with different directors to get the right sort of look for each for the episodes? Or does it always come down to David making the choices of how the show should look and feel?
There's always, I mean, there's that overall kind of David wants, but every episode we would have meetings with the director and the writer who would be David's emissary, essentially, in every meeting. David could go to every meeting. And we would go through the whole script and we would talk about, the specifics and, what do we want to portray here and, your input or your not your input. So we discuss all things ahead of time. I remember there was one episode where we had a guest director, Mike Figgis was directing, and the production designer had his meeting with Mike Figgis, and I guess he felt I'm walking into a show that's kind of already designed, and he didn't want to step on people's feet. And the production designer gave me kind of like a heads up, like I don't think he wants to get too in depth in your meeting. So I was a little annoyed because I thought, again, I need his input. He's the director. You can't just assume that we're just gonna kind of do it. So I walked into the meeting and I said, "Oh, Mike, what's up? We're here to talk about frocks." And we had a kind of laugh. And at the end of the meeting, he said to me, he goes, "Thank you, Juliet." He goes, "I learned a lot about character." Because really, when we talk through, what's happening in the script and what we want to convey, it's really about what would the characters do, what would the characters not do. So
Do you ever find it that as well, if you once you did have like recurring directors coming back in and people that you worked with before, did you find it that each time it became easier and easier because you kind of knew how they worked and how you worked as well?
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, there's just a shorthand that, you're just more comfortable with one another and you communicate differently. And yeah, we had some really, really wonderful directors on our show. Tim Van Patten being one of them, John Patterson, who was another one who was just a delight to work with. And I remember one time, it was 10 while you're filming and there's the monitor that everybody is looking at, the director's looking at, the DP's looking, the script supervisor, the hair and makeup, or everybody's looking at the monitor. And John said, he goes, everybody's looking at the monitor and everybody's looking at something different. And it's true. I'm looking to see like something about the costume, and the hair and makeup people are looking at something, and the cinematographer is looking at something, and the director's looking at the whole picture.
I think that's always an interesting thing to think about as well when people are around the monitor and what people are looking at, because each department will be looking at their moment to shine, as you said, if it's hair and makeup or costume or art direction as well. You don't want the certain things in place whilst everybody's thinking about that jigsaw puzzle. As you said, the director looks at the whole puzzle and goes about it that way as well.
Or
Um,
there's, as a costume designer, you're looking at the framing and you're seeing, maybe there's something about it, the actor ripped something from when they went on set, or something you're like, does it read? Did we fix it? Do you see it? And nobody else is looking at that. Nobody knows to look at it. And sometimes, I'll ask a camera operator, like, do you see their feet in the framing because, an actor wants to wear their slippers because they want to be comfortable. They're not looking at the specific. They're not looking what I would be looking at. They're looking at composition. And so yeah, everybody does. And that's the great thing about the collaborative nature of film and television is that all these people looking at a different aspect of it. You put it all together and it makes this whole.
And even though there's certain probably design choices that you make, you don't want, as you said, if there's like a rip or something, you don't want that to be seen on screen if you haven't fixed it in time. And I think that's something that I've never really thought about as well, is those little final checks and imperfections in your characters of like how it will look on screen and how it would feel as well. Just because like as an audience member, we never I think like subconsciously we don't really think about that. We look at the you look at the final product in terms of like
Yeah.
what the character is rather than those little nuances of like, oh, what's happened here or what might have happened there.
Nobody's, but that's why, that's part of what our jobs are, is to look at, is that costume distressed enough? Is it dirty enough? Does it look old enough? We just did all this, but does it read on camera? Do we need to do more? Yeah, it's just small little things that people take for granted, but there's a conversation and there's effort that goes into everything. Nothing is left to chance.
Yes, and I can't imagine any costume designer leaving things to chance when it comes to their work. But then also as well like the breakdown of costumes and how they're lived in, because you can't just take something straight off the rack and expect someone to wear it like it's brand new unless it's specifically brand new for the scene.
Right.
That's something that always sort of like that once it's not necessarily blows my mind, but it's always amazing that that's the sort of detail that audience members subconsciously don't think about, but it's there on screen and it's been a breakdown artist has worked a number of hours just to make that look like it's been lived in and
Yeah.
used more than once. It's been in
And
somebody's
and
closet.
you notice it when it's wrong. You don't notice it when it's right. One of the more kind of annoying things is when you have a character who would say wear a construction boot, like a Timberland, something that a character would have worn for ages and is broken in and, really kind of worn down. You buy a brand new Timberland and they don't look like that. And it takes a lot of work, to get it to that. And sometimes you just don't have the time. And I had a very brilliant assistant, and what she would do sometimes is say we had an actor who was a size 10 shoe. She would buy a great, Timberland boot and a size 10. Around lunchtime, she would go to construction sites where guys who would be wearing boots. And she's like, who's the size 10? And she would take their shoe, give them a brand new boot. And so we paid for the boot, but what we got in return was a beautifully distressed boot. And some guy on a construction site got a brand new pair of boots.
Uh, I wonder if like whoever the construction guy was at the time was, I wonder if they were just thinking, what is the catch here? What is going on?
Yeah,
And then
exactly.
on top of that, it's like that's like a really clever idea of going about it as well. That you can be like, yeah, I can swap these out and basically do have the work done for us already and also look authentic because
Yeah,
whoever the person
absolutely.
was.
Absolutely. It was a great time saver, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's quite funny as well. There's you're mentioning as well about you've sort of like scratched the surface a little bit with your team, but we're working on a show for so long, and crew members will come and go just because of availability and what happens as well. That people might step up or and whatnot. As a head of department, how do you go about recruiting your team and also getting everybody to pull in the same direction to create the looks?
Well, I often wish that we had the same type of meetings that we have with directors and writers, for like a staff meeting. But I would have with my assistant designers, we would call it a conclave. So after I would come out of my design meeting with the directors and writers, then I would meet with my assistants to kind of go through and essentially, or sometimes, I had two assistants. And so one of them would be working on one episode and the other one would be working on the next one. And so to get the other one up to speed, the three of us would kind of talk about it. So we were all on the same page. So when we went off in three different directions to shop or what have we all had the same ideas in mind. And as far as the wardrobe crew, blessed with some really, really kind of wonderful people. And they once I decided what they were wearing, then they took it and ran with it. I mean, they're the ones who were, kind of with the actors and made sure that it looked perfect or imperfect, whatever, kind of was needed. And, having a tailor that you really trust, who can uh, be sensitive to an actor's figure and know how to get things done quickly and have the quality look. I don't know what it is that kind of makes a good team, but we had a great team. We had a great team. We all worked together really well.
You don't really know how well your team will work until you're sort of thrown into it. Obviously, you interview people, or you would get people on due to recommendations. But once you start pulling in the same direction, then it kind of then you know the sort of team that you're working with, and it's also like understanding what's needed from you to them for them to sort of get everything done as well.
Definitely were some changes over the years, but ultimately you hire people who are really good at their job, and then you know you don't have to micromanage. They just leave that for them to do because they're good at it and
Yeah.
they're brilliant.
And I think as well, like as a head of department, because you guys are so creative at what you do, in terms of like you not just the sort of drawing out and designing, but then also going to purchase items, or if you have tailors making items, then also you need to be creative how, if you're on a budget, how that money is going to be spent and spread over 13 episodes. Because as I said, like there could be various looks that could be in the show or not in the show, in the episode, sorry. And you kind of want to make sure that you've got enough for each episode or each block that you'll be shooting in.
Mhm. Yeah, no, just doing budgets is probably everybody's least favorite thing to do, but you have to have a guideline and you have to submit something to your producer. And one of the things that we had that would save a lot is, all of my main characters and a lot of my, kind of secondary characters all had closets. So in the same way that, you getting dressed, you'll just go to your closet and you'll pick out what to wear. I already kind of had a very decent sized closet for all of them. So, what would she wear in this scene and what would she wear in that scene? Is it something I already have? Is it something I don't have something new I need to get? So hopefully a lot of things we already had. So we were kind of concentrating on all the new things that were in each script.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to sort of think about as well as times goes by, and how many items is enough for to have in people's closets as well for their characters.
Well, you remember one of the things in the very first season, again, because we wanted things to be as real as possible. And I never liked when I would watch a TV show and it just seemed unrealistic that these people would have so many clothes and have a new outfit for, every scene. And I thought, what's real is that people, repeat things. You have a favorite pair of pants or you have a favorite jacket or, kind of whatever. And so that being said, we did that. And then after the first season aired, there were things that when they're very specific, you don't ever want to see them again because it kind of told that story. It's one thing if it's something that's a little bit more generic, like a pair of pants or a leather jacket, but something that is specific, we decided once it's worn, it has to get retired. And so because Olivia lived in Green Grove, which is the name of her retirement home, we called the upper rack where clothes went to be retired as Green Grove. Sort of like, are we gonna Green Grove this?
Oh,
So
some
Yeah. There's one shirt that Carmela wore that I was like, oh my God, I don't ever want to see that shirt again. But, and so I had to put it out of harm's way. So it's like, if it's not there for me to grab, I won't grab it.
Yes, and I guess there's probably one item that was used quite a lot and that wasn't green groved, and that was Tony's robe. That was one of my friend's potential choices for the fancy dress, is to wear the robe and a vest. And then
Oh, that's
again,
fair.
being in with it, the party being in January is probably not the best idea. You probably get hypothermia or something. Um,
Well, in the pilot, he had another robe, and that robe specifically because he went into the pool and they wanted the robe to kind of float out. And so in order to achieve that, they had to, because the fabric wouldn't do that naturally, they sewed corks into the hem of the bathrobe to make it kind of float out a little bit. And then, when we got to the second season, Tony actually had a couple of robes, but, by and large, that white terry cloth robe just was just was right, you know, just kind of like slovenly and basic. And
it's one of those where you don't need to. Maybe this is me, but I think the older you get, it is important to have a really good robe
mm,
and to be able to have something like that comfort, because yeah, I think you just, yeah, the robe bit is just so vital in being at home and being relaxed in your own sort of environment. And yeah, I love.
in contrast, Carmela, who was so outfitty, she would have a nightgown with a robe that coordinated. She would have many robes. She didn't have one kind of go-to, but it was almost like a security blanket in a way.
Yeah, and I think you see that kind of pop up when he's ill and or depressed. He'll always have his trusty robe on to make himself have that, as you said, that blanket and that comfortness with it all. So just to hit with my penultimate question, this is probably, I reckon, I don't think we'll get an answer on this, but it's worth asking. What was your favorite look to design, or who was your favorite character to design for?
Wow, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. I mean, probably Carmelo was my favorite. Again, just because of the reward. It was such a, Edie is so different from, who Carmela is, and it was always very gratifying to see the transformation and working, with an actor who was just so good at what she does and really trusted me and was really kind of game for anything. It was a it's kind of a, I remember one time one of our producers had gone to some event that was in New Jersey. I can't remember what it was. And he came back to me the next day and he says, Juliet, he goes, there were so many Carmelas there last night that there was women of that ilk and look. Yeah, I think Edie was probably Carmela was probably my favorite. I mean, it's like asking a mother to choose like who's your favorite kid. They all were. They all were. Yeah. I mean, they all had their little things that, I would get excited about and, kind of look forward to. I don't think there was a character in the show that I just kind of rolled my eyes or nothing. I really kind of loved them all. And I think, oh God, what did I have the most fun designing? I have to get back to you on that. It's all those seasons kind of like, just kind of like blend together. Certainly when we had funerals, that was always fun to do because everybody was just dressed well and dressed to the nines. And funerals were always fun. Uh, Weddings were always fun. I say fun, they were a lot of work, but they were very kind of gratifying. And another thing we got to do all the time is golf courses. They were always on golf courses, and that was kind of fun to do.
I can imagine as well the like the wedding scenes and those being fun, and as you said, being fun. A lot of work, but fun because people would be that's when everybody's kind of dressed to the nines, and there's always
Oh
not even
yeah.
Sunday best, but impress people best.
But it was so fun. Not only was it, I hate to use the word fun again, it was fun, but it was kind of, kind of gratifying to see everybody dressed and how it worked in the scene and, how it kind of added, to the script. But it was also fun on the day when all of the actors would come out of their trailers after going through hair, makeup, and wardrobe and being on set, and everybody looking at, oh, what are you wearing? What are you, they would like compare each other's looks. And that just made me laugh.
I think that's always like a good feeling as well if your actors are kind of comparing all their looks and how they're, oh wow, like you look like this, oh we've got this, I can imagine as well that's quite a big thing as well because then as actors you're probably not there for the fittings or you don't know what people are wearing, so that's sort of the first time.
Yeah. Well, I
Um,
remember one time I was walking to set with Dre DeMatteo, and she looked at me. She goes, "You just want to come to set because you just want to hear everybody ooh and ah when I walk onto set." And I'm like, "You're right."
you got me.
We were
But
joking. Yeah,
yeah, of course, I know it's the I think as well, like as a costume designer, you do want that sort of like in a way, and to know that people are like, wow, like absolutely nailed the look, and it's like, yeah, we
yeah,
did.
yeah. And
Um,
then it's nice to get that gratification, and then turn around and leave, and we'll go on to the next thing.
yeah, I think as well, like as creatives or people working in the industry, is that you always want to know that you're doing something just right, so then you can continue that sort of hard work. I think obviously if something was wrong, people would tell you, but I think sometimes you just need to know, you just need to get that little bit of like that little pat on the back to be like, yeah, we are doing really well on this.
I mean, everybody needs that, no matter who you are and what you do. Um, it's always nice to hear a compliment from anybody, whether you're name a job, any job.
Yeah, that's
Everybody,
true.
everybody likes to hear that.
Yeah, that's true, actually. That is very true. Just to sort of wrap up the episode as well. And I know we spoke about this beforehand about the sort of influence that the show has. But I'm curious, have you seen this Instagram profile called Soprano Style?
I have not. I've heard about it. I have not, and part of me just doesn't. I don't want to look. I'm incredibly flattered by the whole thing, and
Yeah.
maybe slightly horrified at the same time. I'm not quite sure, but no, I have not. So tell
Okay.
me.
No, I've just again, it's something that kind of pops up and it's funny seeing all the different styles and all the different things that we've spoken about looking at it. And I guess also in my mind, it's again one of those things where the cultural footprint that is still there after all these years. It's a profile that has what 59,500 followers. So if you think about that in terms of just how many people are still looking at your work and still follow it, and that's just on Instagram. You're not talking
Amazing.
about
It's amazing. It really is. I mean, it's just, in fact, tomorrow, I'm talking with a writer. She just contacted me today. She was, I'm doing a story on, it's like a TikTok thing of, mob wife style. Can I talk to you about that? Okay. But crazy.
again. I think that's just one of those things where if something's good, it's always going to be timeless and
Mhm.
it's always going to spark debate and conversation. And even now, I'm sure when it's like 5 years, when it's the 30th anniversary, people will still be talking about it. People will still be going on about, um, you Tony Soprano being one of the best characters on TV. And yeah, I guess sometimes this is the lightning in the bottle sort of thing where somebody could sit down and try figure out the mathematical formula of how something like this could be successful and still be spoken about for so long. and they'll never be able to figure it out because it's just one of those
Yeah,
things.
you could, as one of the people have said about, kind of AI, that, could they spit something like The Sopranos out? And no, they couldn't. There's just too many variables and too many, again, lightning in a bottle. And I don't think a, computer generated script could do that.
I don't think it ever will, and I don't think you can ever create that human connection of what a computer can churn out. It's the same with art and how you feel. Just because the whole reason for art is that debate of what something makes you feel. How do you connect to it? How do you not connect to it? What makes it art? What doesn't make it art? What makes it interesting? What doesn't make it interesting? And yeah, I just don't think that would be. You can't program something to
No,
feel what a
no,
human
that
can feel.
it'll always need a personal touch. And with costumes as with fashion, I remember I went to school for fashion design. First day of class, the teacher said, "What is fashion?" Everybody's, has their answers. And she said, "Fashion is a reflection of the times." And you kind of take that and extrapolate it, to costumes, and it really is. I mean, and certainly Sopranos was, that illustrated that time period, and it still holds up. I mean, you look at it and it's like, oh God, it looks dated, and you kind of look at the suits, but by and large, it still holds up.
I think when as well with somebody that if something is slightly dated or not, I think is a great window into what life was like in that times.
Yeah,
And it's the same with the way that people would have dressed as well. And it's a nice little time capsule. I think that's something that you as an audience also forget about. When when you're watching it, you know where you are and what's happening in that time as well.
absolutely, absolutely.
We can end the episode there. Juliet, thank you so much for your time today. I'm really glad that we could sit down and speak about The Sopranos, and thank you so much for your time. Sopranos is on streaming on Max, and then in the UK it's on Sky Atlantic. If you haven't watched it, treat yourself and watch it. If you have watched it, treat yourself again and keep and rewatching it because there'll be things that you can pick up on. And things that might have been missed. Juliet, thank you again.
Welcome very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you again. You take care and bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.